Welcome, everyone, to this live taping of a very special conversation about movement live with our special guest, Meklit Hadero. This is a special series in partnership with the Art Center at NYU Abu Dhabi, and I am delighted to welcome our co-host, Bill Bragan. Bill is part of the Art Center at NYU Abu Dhabi, and I think can talk about what you guys are up to right now and for the rest of the year. Bill?
Absolutely. We are so glad to be kicking off this podcast with you, Mikey, and especially with Meklit. The Art Center, for those who are not familiar with us, is part of NYU's Abu Dhabi campus. It's one of three network hub campuses worldwide. The Art Center is a presenter and commissioner of work in music, theater, film, interdisciplinary work, performance of all types, and all of the artists who are on our stages are also part of our curriculum at NYU Abu Dhabi, which is a liberal arts college with students from about 120 different countries. We also hold workshops and master classes and chats. And when Meklit was here with Movement, she participated in all of that kind of work, and very much, I will embarrass her now because I embarrassed her when she was here, say that a lot of that program was actually designed based on this idea of what would Meklit do, because she also co-created the Nile project, which was part of our first season and that I had been involved in co-commissioning back at Lincoln Center. And that integration of the arts with all this other kind of engagement was a core part of her practice, and it was why we wanted to really bring her here.
Amazing. So let me introduce, thanks, Bill. Let me introduce Meklit. Meklit Hadero is an Ethiopian-American vocalist, songwriter, and composer known for her eclectic electric stage presence and innovative, deeply personal Ethio jazz songs. Her music has made her a star in her home country of Ethiopia, and her most recent album was named among the best records of the year by Bandcamp and the Sunday Times. UK climbed to the top of iTunes, NACC, and European World Charts. Meklit has performed on stages all over the world, and it is an enormous honor to have you join us today. Welcome, Meklit.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
So let me start with a really basic question.
Okay.
How did the show go in Abu Dhabi? It was a few weeks ago. How did it go?
For me, the show in Abu Dhabi was like the evolution of movement live that I had hoped for. I think, first of all, the artists that we collaborated with were stellar, like just stellar. Freak, Galia, and Cromwell Ojeda. But even more than that, there was like so much of a sense of community, of family, of these kinds of stories of migration, like just it's like meeting your extended family that you didn't know that you had, and then building something together that you could share with an audience who identify because it's their, it's part of their story too. So it was very beautiful. And it was, I would say it was a splash of cold water to leave.
Yeah, I would imagine. I mean, for those who don't know, I'll just read the bylines of some of the people who you were collaborating with. So Abu Dhabi raised Somali rapper Freak, Al Ain-based Syrian singer-songwriter Ghalia Shakir, and Dubai-based Filipino multi-instrumentalist Cromwell Ojeda. Like, this is a true stew of styles and perspectives. Is that a typical experience for you when you perform all over the world?
Well, Movement Live is relatively new. So I want to just, the Art Center at NYU Abu Dhabi is one of our co-commissioners. So the Art Center invested in us to develop this concept, which meant that at the start of them saying yes, they didn't know what exactly it was going to be. Hey, that
Did you know?
Did I know? I had a, artists, we have this like inner voice. Well, we all have this inner voice, right? But artists, it's like you zero in on something and you're like, I know exactly what I have to do. Now the question is how, right? I knew the what. I knew that like bringing musicians together whose life experience and musical journey were grounded in an experience of migration was going to create a bigger story than we could tell on our own. And I knew that was going to be powerful. Now, the how it works, what it looks like, what it feels like, what's the emotional impact that we're going to leave the audience with? This is all stuff that you have to figure out along the way in the process. And so being co-commissioned by the Art Center at NYU Abu Dhabi was the Art Center saying, okay, we're gonna like, let's figure it out together. And let's make sure that this place, Abu Dhabi, is part of how this journey of movement live evolves as it travels around the world. And as the story of, and as the way we frame migration narratives also starts to expand, like this story of Abu Dhabi becomes baked into that foundation because this experience was at its core. So like Bill's heard me say this a million times, so just bear with me, Bill. But like I always say that songwriting is a mix of mystery and discipline. And I would say that kind of applies to creating a show too. Like you have an idea but there's a lot of unknowns involved, but then there's a real discipline to figuring it out. And the pieces have to be together to do that. And that includes a space, that includes a community. And we had all that.
Yeah.
We had all that
You're describing like the process of maybe like a sculptor goes through, or like almost like it's like a chef who's like looking at the spiky pineapple and is saying, I know there's something beneath the skin. And once I cook it, it's going to taste completely different. But you just have to trust me. Let's take a second, if it's okay with you, to listen to the trailer, especially for those who are watching the YouTube video who may not be familiar with what this looks and sounds like. This is a trailer that is on the NYU Art Center, NYU Abu Dhabi Art Center YouTube account, and it's just a minute long, so this will be a lot of fun.
Your currency and Molukan's legacy was written in melody. They all have a place and my table with me singing.
So let me ask you a question about your music. What, if you'll allow me, what is like a common description of your music that irks you? That you feel like, oh my God, you're not getting it?
Oh, well, I think what is tough for me is when well, let's put it, I'm just trying like, which of the bouquet of ways should I share with you?
Because I feel like it just as you're sort of cooking up the answer, I feel like when I was listening to your music and very much enjoying it all week, I was thinking to myself, well, somebody might think of this as being cute or quirky or world music or any number of things. And if I were in this ensemble, it would drive me crazy. These adjectives may just drive me crazy. And I was wondering if there are any things where you think that is a fundamental misunderstanding of what I'm trying to do, and what I hope people perceive.
Well, I think what I struggle with is like people who say you should be all one thing or all another. Like, they pick one part of the kind of what goes into the mix and say, God, if only you just did that. Like, if only you were just doing like all, Ethiopian music, or if you were only just be a singer-songwriter, just go up there with your guitar and just, strum a chord or just only be. And so I think like what really irks me is a kind of pressure to simplify the narrative. And because like the whole reason I make music is to have a space where I can express multiplicity, complexity, and invite people to dance while they're listening, you know? So really the thing that's hard for me is like that oversimplification. And a lot of artists feel that, like when people try to, I mean, the words you hear a lot are like, put them in a box, you know?
Yeah.
But that doesn't feel good. Like, nobody likes being in a box. Like, let me out, man. Let me be free.
Yeah. I mean, there's something that's very organic about your music. And when I say organic, what I mean is like literal, like organisms, like it's natural, right? And I was listening to your TED Talk and you were talking about how much nature is a part of the way you think about music and, you know, heard sounds and thinking about how the sounds from nature can be chaotic, right? They can actually not fit into perfect time signatures and perfect key signatures and stuff like that. Has that always been the way you approached it, or was there a moment where you sort of broke free from the sort of the boxiness of a lot of traditional, at least pop music?
Well, I think that, you know, for me, the nature element is really important. I like acoustic instruments. I have nothing against electronic instruments. I'm not like speaking, I don't say that in the like in any kind of derogatory way. I just mean like for me, I love like an instrument that is made of wood and skin. Like for example, when I play the kirar, the Ethiopian harp, like I think about the tree that made the wood and the animal whose skin, you know, is literally the resonance chamber that is resonating the instrument. And it connects me to a place because I think about, well, what is the place where this thing grew, where this tree grew, where this animal, you know, grew. And then it links me to a place in a very, very visceral kind of way. And I think that the sounds that are made from that have a piece of the place in a way that is actually undescribable. It's actually very, I don't know, mysterious as well. Like it influences the place, you know, or it influences the sound. And I like that. So, and I also, and we're like that too, as people who resonate from places. So, you know, so the organic for me is always a part of my music and a part of my sound. And just a part of the way that I think about music in general.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question, but
no, you totally did. I mean, it's has that always been true though? That's a part of the question. Like, has that always been the case, even when you were a kid? I don't know. Did you start playing music when you were really, really young, or was it sort of in your teenage years and in your 20s?
So I started. I always sang, always. But I didn't, and I always wanted to perform. Like when I was 3 years old, my dad would always tells me the story. It's like where I would stop people on the street, ask if they wanted to hear different songs, and I would just start performing. So I guess it was in me.
Was there any go-to songs?
It would be like a
6-year-old
lullaby.
Mekhlit was.
No, it would all be like a lullaby or like a children's song or like whatever, like an Ethiopian song that we were singing at home. Like it was whatever. Or like then I got older and it would be like songs on the radio, like, you know. But so music was always in me. I didn't write my first song until I was 25 years old, which is like it's kind of like a fact that I'm secretly proud of because.
Yeah.
Because I feel because it was like it was such an interesting time, and it was like a time when I was able to, like it was at a time in my life where I felt like I was finally giving myself permission to like listen to that inner voice that I was talking about before, and then it was like when you remove a rock from a spring or something. It was like, and then like so many songs came, but also so many opportunities to share music. And it was like at that time, I like to say that every step I took towards music took 10 steps towards me. Like at that time, it was very much like, okay, like here's a path that's really like, it was like, yes, finally. But in terms of like, the philosophical ways that I think about music, like though meaning like about the way I think of the discipline and mystery, or related to nature, like all that evolved with my songwriting practice. As my practice deepened, my understanding of music deepened too. So those sort of philosophies really came later, as the practice matured in me.
Can we talk about that? Can we talk about the practice? Because so oftentimes songwriters and musicians that at least that I've spoken to, I grew up playing music. I feel like they talk about practicing, right? They don't talk about like the capital P practice, the practice. But I can imagine like writers talk about the practice. So it seems apropos that songwriters would also talk about the practice. So can you shed light a little bit, if you would, just what does that mean? What did it mean for your practice to develop?
Well, it meant understanding that I needed routines. Like, because you hear a lot of things about, like the song came to me, or this song, like, sprang out fully formed. And that does happen. And when that happens, you have to be very, very grateful,
Yeah.
But like most songs take work. They take like a structure. Like this is, I arrive at the studio at this time, whether the studio is the room in the back of your apartment, or like your garage, or, a place that you go. It's like you arrive there, and you work for a certain number of hours, and you do that again and again and again and again, until either the songs develop, the body of work develops, the concept develops of what is the sound you're trying to make. But there just has to be that sense of rhythm, which helps you to develop a momentum. What I find is that, like, there's times when you're writing a lot, or at least for me, there's times when I'm writing a lot, and then maybe I'll be on the road for a while. And I don't really write on the road very well. Some people like to, but that doesn't really work for me. And then I come back and I have to get back into it. The practice has to like build. Okay, you're there day after day after day. And then you hit something, and then like a lot comes. So it's more like that for me.
Yeah. Is it, it's funny that you say you don't write well on the road. Usually I find the sort of the road versus home dichotomy, I think relates somewhat to the places where you can either lose yourself or find yourself. Do you feel like your music is an exercise in losing yourself or finding yourself in that sort of way?
Well, performance is losing yourself, and songwriting is finding yourself. Performance is just being so free. It's like, I feel like my job on stage is to be so free that others find a way into their own freedom, in the sense of like, just being free in your body and yourself,
Beautiful.
And but when you're songwriting, it's finding, it's digging, it's like, it's the search, it's a searching.
Is it a painful experience?
Oh God, sometimes, sure. Yeah, I mean, well, because sometimes we write songs about painful things.
Yeah.
And you're digging around and searching around for the way to express something difficult. And that can be really hard. I think that there's also a practice of letting go that comes, like, for example, like if you write a sad song, then every time you get up on stage and sing that song, you're going to feel a piece of that sadness. You got to find a way to let it go and not stick to you, and not stick to you. The same with songwriting. If you're writing something about a painful experience or a difficult experience, you also have to find a way to like, okay, I'm going to leave that here for now so that I don't carry it with me into the day. So there's also a process of like, almost like rinsing yourself off from the emotions of the stage or the emotions of the studio, depending on what you're working with as an artist at the time.
So Mekhlit, I'm curious. One of the classes that you visited when you were here, you were talking about your songwriting process, and one of the little bit of a jaw-dropping comment you made was that for the last record, you wrote, maybe recorded about 60 songs, of which 11 or 12 actually made it onto the record. So I'm curious, in that sort of painful finding yourself in the song, what was it that you let go of in the songs that didn't make the cut? And do they return? Do they return in a different way? Is it that they didn't feel right for that record, but they might feel at another point? Do you rip them apart and say, I'm going to reuse that chorus or that bridge? Tell me a little bit about that, kind of that creating and then letting go of what you've created.
Well, first I want to say that it's not all painful and hard and sad. Like there's plenty of joy and like fun and all that too. It's just the question was about that. So that's where I went. But there's all the stuff in the stew, you know. In terms of, I wrote 55 songs for my last record and chose 11. And some of the reasons that I didn't pick those other songs, those other 44, was that they weren't all good. You know, it's like I just decided that I was going to go for a volume, because like you kind of don't, if you go for volume, then eventually you'll write something good. And then part of the art is like figuring out which ones to keep. But the ones you don't keep, like for example, it's not only songs, it's like versions of songs. Like I'll write a song and then I'll do 3, 4, 5 arrangements, you know, and but it's true, it all becomes like a bank of material. So sometimes I'll go back to that and be like, that bass line, that was a good bass line. That was a good bass line. Right now I have a situation where a version of a song, like one of the arrangements that I made of a song Yerak Aira Sal, which was on the last record, an old version of it, which was completely different. Like it had the same lyrics, but different melody, different horn lines, different bass lines, different scales, everything. Like that arrangement has been in my head. And I'm like, I think I have to go back to that. So, and that's how many years later that's in my head every day this week. So it's like, you don't let things go. And that's why like old computers, old hard drives, like you can't let these things go. Like you have to have them in a place that you can access them.
Amazing. I have another question about sort of, you know, in many ways your music explores this like liminal space of what does, you know, let me rephrase this. We grew up listening to tons of different music, right? Constantly. If you're just going through life, you are constantly listening to lots of different music from lots of different cultures, from lots of different times in life, from lots of different devices, natural music, lots of different things. And your music and your work sort of pushes up against that and shows that, right? Tries to display that. I'm curious, that type of music has always been described as world music. A lot of that stuff has been described as world music, which is, I haven't met one person who likes that term. What term do you feel works better to describe the work that you're trying to do and to describe this phenomena of lots of different artists who are going back and forth from lots of different places?
Well, you know, first of all, I love to tell this story of the creation of the term world music, which for those of you who don't know, it was made up. There's an article about it in The Guardian. The term world music was created in 1987 in a cafe when a bunch of record store owners didn't know what to do with the records of King Sunny Ade and Bob Marley. And they were like, there are people who want to buy this music and they don't know where to go. They don't really, they can't find it. It's like somehow in rock music, or it finds its way into like a folk music, but that's not really what people mean. And so they create, and also Peter Gabriel was involved in this. So they created this category of world music to help people find records that, you know, specifically King Sunny Ade and Bob Marley records. And, you know, I mean, but so first of all, recognize that is for a commercial purpose, that it was created for commerce, and it was not created from an artistic point of view. But they were sort of like, these also weren't like big companies. They were like small record store owners trying to do the best they could, you know, and then Peter Gabriel up in there. So, so it's, so I've been experimenting with the term migration music as a way to describe what I do, because I think I make music that is born from an experience of migration. And that, if you understand that about my music, then actually everything makes sense. Now, that doesn't necessarily apply to everybody who's making music that we talk about as world music. But like, there was this moment when I was when I was talking to Galia, and who was one of the artists in Movement Live in Abu Dhabi, and she was saying, "Oh yeah, my mom liked to listen to lots of world music," describing her Syrian mother in Abu Dhabi. She was like, "Yeah, my mom liked to listen to a lot of world music like Elvis and the Beatles." And I was like, yo, if the term world music was understood as relative, in other words, it was the music of any other place, no matter where you were. Like, for example, if you were in Nigeria, then world music would be anything other than Nigerian music. That I would be cool with, because it's about a relative experience of, you know, it still has an othering aspect, but it's sort of better. It was great.
Yeah, if it just meant non-local.
Exactly. If it just meant non-local. I think the interesting thing that I'm trying to do with migration music is to say that the non-local is local. You know, and so, which is to make a point about the porousness of culture. You know, now I don't think that term applies to everybody, but what I also think is that we need new language, and that I would love to have forums where we just like iterate with like large communities of people. Like, what should we be calling things? You know, let's figure it out together. Like, how do we build new language, and in language that actually works for the world as it is right now, you know, created by people from, like, you know, from incredibly diverse perspectives that don't center Western ideas of what is normal and what is other.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the movement and sort of the podcast and all that stuff. So talk to me a little bit about, if somebody finds this website Movement and sees all these episodes, what are they finding, and what was the vision behind this project?
Well, the project started in 2017, and it started, we were invited to create a podcast about world music at Al Jazeera, in fact, which had an office.
Invited by Peter Gabriel.
Invited by Julie Kane. And we created, and this is when we decided we were going to explore music and migration and what those intersections were. And what we made was, we basically had like 6 weeks or something like that. And we made what became our Thanksgiving special, which aired November of 2020, eventually on PRX's The World as their Thanksgiving episode. And it was 3 stories of artists going to return to play in their homelands. Sinkane, who is based in Brooklyn, but returning to perform for the first time in Sudan. Diana Gameros, a Mexican singer-songwriter based in San Francisco, who is returning to play in her hometown of Juarez, Mexico, after being undocumented for many years, for over a decade. And an artist called Hello Psych Aleppo, who could not return to his homeland because his city had been razed to the ground in the war. And he was making music inspired by birds, and really expressing the transient nature of not being able to return home. And so those were the 3 artists that we were working with for a pilot. And basically what happened was, we were, you know, they didn't pick up the podcast as a regular part of their season, but they were really cool, and they were like, go forth and take it forward. So we did that. And what we were trying to do was to find new ways of talking about migration. Because like if you read about migration in not just national but international headlines, what you find is a lot of trauma. And, often, we don't want to discount those stories of trauma and difficulty. We're not trying to hide from them, but also to say that migration is actually far more complex, and that people who experience migration should be able to define the ways that we think about it, talk about it, make space for it. And we didn't see that. And we certainly didn't see that in a public way, in a cultural context. So we were like, and also like it's the thing about Movement is that it's a music discovery podcast at the same time as it is a different and new way to talk about migration. So, and that was the beginning, was really the podcast and the radio show. We are so lucky after a few years of searching to find wonderful partners in PRX and The World. And we will return to monthly broadcasts on The World starting in March of 2023. And a formal podcast will launch in partnership with PRX in March of 2023, including the stories that we created with our 3 collaborating artists in Abu Dhabi. And, it's been a journey of like finding the integration of the live show and the podcast. But really, we're creating multiple spaces to express these stories because, of course, when you're talking to musicians, you want to see them perform and you want to hear them tell their stories. Like sometimes you go to concerts and the stories that people tell in between the songs, you remember them just as much as you remember the songs. And so Movement Live is a place where both of those things can happen. But then also you want a space for the extended stories, and that's possible for us in the podcast.
Amazing. I want to ask Bill a question. Originally, Bill, what was your hope for bringing Mekhlit to Abu Dhabi? And what were you hoping the students would take away from both the performance, her interaction with students, the workshop, and everything else?
So I guess I'll start just by saying that Mekhlit and I have known each other for probably about a dozen years now. And we met each other originally right when the Nile Project was starting and being conceived. And so I've been very privy, I think, to her process of how she thinks about music and how she thinks about the social engagement and the political engagement and the implications of that in just the way she was describing right now, and seeing how these hugely impactful and really creative projects have come together. So when I heard about Movement and the way that she was kind of moving some of these conversations forward, it immediately appealed. In the UAE, where depending on who you talk to, 85 to 90% of the residents of the UAE are migrants from somewhere else. It is one of the defining factors of the nation, including for the 10 to 15% of people who are from here, who have invited in all of these people from outside. And now increasingly conversations about the implications for people who are second generation or third generation residents, but not citizens of the UAE. So it raises really interesting, complicated questions that people are talking about all the time, and that the UAE is actually actively contending with as it changes visa policies and adds artist visas and freelance visas and golden visas, and is really looking at how do you build sort of a longer term commitment to the nation as it grows. So I think thematically, it really felt like this would resonate. Knowing Mekhlit, I knew that she individually, through her presence in classes and in the community, would really resonate. I think it's important just to mention that our audience is probably 80+% non-students. We're a performing arts center that's serving all of the UAE. And I think in particular, the structure of this show, where it is inviting in artists who have really been making the independent music scene onto the stage. And so it gave us a chance. I've been watching Freak's career develop for the past 8 years since I got here. I first met him as a videographer working at a recording studio here, and he shot a documentary for us. Cromwell, who's on the call, and hopefully we'll pull him in at some point. He played in a band with Zahid Sultan from Kuwait in our second season. So I've known him as a musician, kind of working in like a myriad different situations. And then Kalia, again, is somebody that I've been watching. So this also gave us the framework to actually really invest in local artists and really platforming them in a bigger format than just let's do a concert. And then also, I think the presence of the podcast and knowing that that artists from the UAE don't often have a platform that brings their art outside of here to international stages. And for them to be able to tell their stories, and the dialogue around migration is so different in the UAE versus in the US or in Europe and other parts of the world, to be able to share both their art and their stories on an international platform that can really give them an extended focus, that was also a really important reason to bring the project here.
Amazing. Mekhlit, anything surprise you about your trip?
Well, I mean, so many things. Well, first of all, I want to say that, like, I feel very lucky that we were able to, like, I know that it is still relatively short, but there are so many tours where you're in, you play, and you're gone. And so, like, I just feel so lucky that we had the time to actually get to know a place in a way that felt like meaningful and significant, and how important that was to the nature of the project. I think one of the things that was, I don't want to say surprising, but I'm just going to use the word special. And I'm also going to call out Cromwell, who's on the call, was like, we got to hang, like, we got to really, like, Cromwell was, and it, like, the whole band has been talking about it for the last couple of weeks. They were like, whenever they tell the story of what we experienced in Abu Dhabi, they were like, oh yeah, and you know, we were really spending time with the collaborating artists, like Cromwell, he was taking us around, and you know, like it just was a special level of meaningful connection that feels like it's exactly what we want for the nature of the project, but it's sometimes hard depending on the constraints of how much time you have in a space. So that was just really special. I will say that, I mean, you probably hear everybody say this, and so I'm sorry for the obvious answer, but like the heat was like, whoa, like I've never, I was like, wow. But then also the air conditioning, like everything was so cold. Like I didn't pack enough sweaters for Abu Dhabi. Like what?
Yeah. Early September.
That was the thing.
Yeah, we have this thing that when we invite artists to open the season, it's a huge point of honor to open the season, but we know that they're going to come here and have exactly this reaction. So if we bring people back, the promise is you come back in sometime between November and March, and then you go, oh, this is heaven.
Okay. Yeah.
So before we get to the quick Q&A, I want to ask you a little bit about what you're working on now.
Well, we're working on, so Movement Live works with local artists who are, have an experience of migration that influences their music everywhere that we go. So right now, we just on Monday launched an open call for artists in the New York metropolitan area for our show, which will be happening at Lincoln Center in March. And then we are also launching an open call for Los Angeles, and we'll be working with UCLA in the fall. And so, and then right now, Ian, who is the co-founder of Movement and also the sound designer, we are working on we're working on our full season of the podcast, which will launch in March 2023. Some of those episodes will be it will be like what we recorded in Abu Dhabi with our collaborating artists. It will be the artists that come out of the New York experience. And, but we also have the opportunity to add artists. And so Ian and I are in a process of pitching each other for who we feature in some of those additional episodes that will be part of our debut. So that's, and then I'm recording in November an
Yeah.
album of traditional Ethiopian songs, which I'm reimagining and doing new arrangements for. And I'm also figuring out how to work with, I have a completed EP that I'm trying to figure out when I'm going to put that out. So there's a lot happening.
Wow. Have you felt like the style of your music is constantly being influenced by these collaborators and shows and tours? I feel like you're a sponge for influences. So like if you are, like if you're doing a show in Manila in the Philippines, I can imagine that like 4 days in the Philippines changes the way you write songs for the next couple weeks.
I think that's true, but I don't think it's always that obvious. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like, because for example, you might hear the way that an artist constructs a chorus, right?
Yeah.
You'd be like, oh, they do their chorus this way. Oh my goodness. And then the thing about people who've experienced migration is that there's a fine line between like what belongs to the culture, what belongs to the place, and what belongs to the like the bloom of an individual like creative expression. And so there's a lot of cross influencing, but you can't always pinpoint the origin. So yes, definitely influenced, but it's not always like a one-to-one line, like of this becomes that. It's also just an ambiance, a vibe, a way of working, a way of being. And then just also like, because when you're in these production experiences for Movement Live, it's a very creative experience. And so you also just feel like, God, I need to write new songs. I need to write new songs. I need to get in the studio now. And that's also like a part of the, a part of the vibe where you just want to write or you just want to play. And that's a gift too.
Very cool. Okay, let's do the quick Q&A, and then we have a question in the chat from aforementioned Cromwell. Okay, so quick Q&A. The first one is, what are you reading or watching these days?
Oh, well, I am sad to say that I am not reading much these days. Oh, but I get to plug my sister.
Yeah, go for it.
Because my sister is so bad at amazing. Excuse me. I don't know what the rules are of this podcast. My sister is an incredible writer. She's incredible. She just released her debut short story collection called A Down Home Meal for These Difficult Times. And she is the winner of the A.K.O. Kane Prize for African Writing. And she's like an award-winning, she's been in Best American Short Stories. She's one of my inspirations. And she deals with a lot of the same themes of migration, but in a very, very different way through literature. And her debut book was just released. And so like I have, I've read all of those stories, but if I'm recommending, I got to call her out.
What's her name?
Meklit Hadero.
Cool.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That very key important thing. Meklit Hadero. And then in terms of watching right now, I will say that like I nothing special to call out there. Sorry.
Okay. All right, let's keep going. Who would you love to shadow for a day, past or present?
Oh gosh, who would I love to shadow for a day? Probably Stevie Wonder in the recording studio, because I heard
what album?
Songs in the Key of Life. He wrote speaking of volume, he wrote 200 songs for that record.
Were all of them in the key of life, or were some of them in other keys?
Key of Life.
He like finished this one. He's like, this one's an A flat. This one, this doesn't. This one.
In classical music, they do have a sense that like certain keys are for certain things. For example, and not just classical music. For example, a lot of soul music is in B flat. I mean, that's a good key for the saxophone, but also like they say B flat is really good for emotional expression. A is more pastoral, so for pastoral scenes. So that is a thing, by the way. It's not just but no, because I would love to see like 200 songs. Like I would just love to soak that up.
Yeah, I mean that's like yeah. Okay, Stevie, Song in the Key of Life. Okay, next one. I sort of asked you this slightly, but what do people misunderstand about your work?
Yeah, same answer. They like to like hook on to one thing or another rather than the whole. And that's where the misunderstanding kind of irks me. I like music to be a place for like, let's call it playful complexity.
Yeah. Let me change this question. What did 24-year-old Mekhlit, before she wrote her first song, misunderstand about the career that you have embarked on?
Interesting. Okay. I thought that, well, okay, so it's interesting. So you chose that year because it was right before I started writing songs. I didn't understand how you could actually have a life as a musician, have a career as a musician in a way that wouldn't be like selfish, really straight up, like that wouldn't just be about you. Because you see a lot of stars out there, like, and it's like, it seems like they have I was worried at that time that you get addicted to the applause in a way that warps what you see as important, act on as important. It seemed to be itself a kind of drug that didn't bring out the best in people. And so I was very worried about that. I was like, I can't, like, I didn't want to touch it because it didn't seem positive. Even having great examples of artists, but what I learned, but then it was that same year, I became immersed in a community of singer-songwriters, visual artists, filmmakers from all over the world, creating a street level arts festival that was about community engagement, community empowerment, and also an artistic practice not about commercialism, but about like the importance of power building amongst communities to really be able to tell their own stories, their own narratives, and respond socially to the city around them, the world around them. And I was like, oh, that's how I can do it. I get it now. Like, I really get it. I can understand it. I see the depth of potential. And so, and also I saw that the applause, it wasn't really the applause that was the meaningful part. It was when the power of music to make 100 separate bubbles or 300 separate bubbles or 500 or 1,000 into one big bubble, in the sense of being together with people inside of like a kind of like a connection that fed the soul. And I was like, oh, it's not even like the applause is just like, that's just what culture tells you do at the end of a song. That's not even the important part. The important part is how it makes a group of people feel together. And then I was like, released.
Yeah. Do you feel more like a performer or an artist? Does that question even make sense?
I love to perform. Like, listen, here's the thing about performing. When I was like 18, I would.
Thank you for entertaining my questions, by the way.
It's, it's all good. When I was like 18, if we would go dancing with my high school friends, and I would get so into it that like a space would form around me where like people were kind of, but it wasn't good. It was kind of like, whoa, what's she doing? She's really on her own over there. Like, I was just in my own space. I would just feel the music so much, and just like, it didn't even matter, and it was weird, but it was kind of like awkward. Later on, I understood that thing is exactly what you do on stage, and it works. It's like stage was actually the place for that. So the performer in me, like, I love to get lost in sound, lost in music, but then sharing that and having a space to share that so that others feel invited into that ability to find your own sense of freedom and your own sense of like, I don't care what you think. I'm just gonna do what I do. And then also, this is the last thing I'll say about it, the discovery that like when you're on stage, there's like this, speaking of the inner voice, there's this inner voice that like tells you what to do. Meaning like, okay, you get these impulses and it's like, okay, now I'm going to stand on the table. Now I'm going to like drop to my knees. Now I'm going to like jump up and down. Now I'm going to get the audience to clap. And you just learn to follow it. You just learn to follow it. And that's where the good stuff comes. And so that's the improvisation of performing. The improvisation of being an artist is like everything it takes to get to that place. So they are, you know, it's like this, you know, they're not totally different things, but they're, you know, very connected.
So cool. I've been trying to sort of parse out the differences between those two.
Why?
For a couple months. Why?
Yeah. Why? Why do you, what is important to you about finding the difference between those things?
Oh, what's important about it? I don't know. I've been thinking about it
too. Mm-hmm.
I know you are. Trust. I've been thinking about it a lot. My family's filled with artists, and I think about this idea. So the dichotomy in my mind is artists are trying to find themselves and trying to express themselves and tell the world who they are. And sort of, it feels like the best working definition I can find of like what being an artist is and what art is finding ways to express yourself in the service of telling the world a specific problem in the world, right? And sort of elucidating some problem. And that maybe that problem is like the depth of your love, or maybe the problem is like genocide. But regardless, I feel like that's what art is often. Whereas performers, in my mind, they are in service of not themselves, but of the greater community. So it's like, in my mind, being a singer in a choir, they are trying to get their voice to actually just melt away and actually be a part of the larger group. If they are standing out, they're actually not performing precisely correctly, right? The difference between a choreographer and a dancer who's performing that choreography, neither one is obviously better or worse than the other, but I've been thinking about that idea and how often people performing artists, right, have to toggle between the two, and which hat feels more comfortable to them. So that's what I've been thinking about a lot lately.
And which ones are you?
I think I'm most often a performer. I think artistry scares me for the reasons it scares you. I think it could be, or it scared you. I think it's like a possibly corrosive activity when it would bounce off my personality.
It's interesting because, you know, I think there's also something about balance in there.
Yeah.
Like, for example, like nowadays, when I come off stage from these, you know, you feel this like electric sense of, you know, elevation. And then I come off stage and my kid is like, okay, we're going to play with Buzz Lightyear now.
Yeah.
And
that's nice.
Oh, it's great.
Oh,
but it's
so nice.
But the point is that like, even when those tendencies of like ego, like you actually need a little bit of ego to get up on a stage. You got to have because it's you.
For sure.
You need some bravery. But then you also can create these things around you that also show you like that balance, those things that are so like, so for example, like then I get off stage and I'm like, okay, I'm going to change a diaper now. Like, it's just like, it's like, you're not like, you are everything. You are everything. Like, there's not a point where it's like, that's not you. No, the mother is me. The like I'm gonna like, you know, change the sheets now. I'm gonna, you know, and then I'm gonna be on stage and then and so it's also like a balance of like, which part of you do you need to access for which situation? And it's not so black and white. But anyway, I'm not actually scared of it anymore at all. But I do think you build things in that balance the intensity, because it's very intense. It's very, very intense. And you also, like, sometimes you can get in these scenarios where you can't sleep because you the music like gave you so much energy you can't sleep, things like that. Like then you balance, you're like, oh, okay, I need to do some breathing exercises and I need to stretch after I get off the stage. And then that doesn't happen to me. And so, you just find ways to manage the intensity, but also understand that those things are also power. Like that's the power. Like you're also like, you're a conduit for power as an artist. Like, but that's not your power. That's the power of the music. Don't get it wrong. Like you are a space for the power of music, which is eternal, which goes back and back and back and back and will go forward and forward. And there you are on a line. Let it just, you go like it goes. This is back to letting it go, right? Yeah. Like you don't hold it and say, this is me. I'm sorry. I don't mean to like act like I'm giving advice.
No, that's precisely right. I feel like you're a vessel through which this is supposed to pass. I think the most apt analogy in my mind is like surfing, and this idea of like, are you fighting the wave or riding it? You don't own the wave. You have no ownership of this like insanely powerful force. Okay, I have to respect your time. And we have one question in the chat from Cromwell who asked me to ask it for him. So let me pull it up. Does the show movement have an effect or influence in your songwriting / future releases and music? Do you believe that your style of music also migrates when, whether in the form of musical evolution from time to time? What's your biggest takeaway from every movement show that you do?
And he just asked another question, which were in the chat, which I see. If you were to do your biggest movement live with 3 world famous artists, who are they going to be? I'm taking suggestions. Crom, you can email me and tell me if you think of somebody that you're like, you should really work with this person. Like, I mean, who knows what happens in the world? But people I would love to do, I mean, there are just so many. Like, I would love to feature Angelique Kidjo. I would love to feature Ibrahim Malouf. I would love to feature, I'm really into Sampha the Great. She's so cool. There are just so many. I think that, it's literally an endless stream of fantastic stories. And, whether or not those folks would do a movement live with us, like I probably get them on the podcast. So, or on the radio show. So, fingers crossed for us. And then in terms of the other question, the movement experiences absolutely change the music, not necessarily in the moment, but in a longer term way, like when you get back to the studio. And the biggest takeaway from every show that we do is community. It's like that. It's like I was saying earlier, it's like you meet extended family that you didn't know that you had. When you meet a cousin, and your mom is like, hey, this is your cousin. And you're like, oh, hey, I didn't know you. Oh, hey. And then it's like that, but bigger, but like, more expansive, and so that's the vibe I like to go into these shows with. And I think, so far, that's really, really what we have experienced. Thanks also to you, Crom, who was a huge part of that feeling and experience in Abu Dhabi. We miss you.
Amazing. So before we wrap up, I just want to mention for those listening, we have 4 more of these amazing collaborations with the Art Center at NYU Abu Dhabi, and they are on the screen now. So if you are interested in keeping up with us, go to our website, look for us on afikra, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, everywhere you find podcasts, on YouTube and social media. These will go out. You can attend live if you're listening on the podcast. And thank you so much, Mekhlit. Thank you so much for your honesty and your music. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me.